The Trithian Empire had been unstoppable for millennia, an unrivaled superpower in the galaxy. Its military might crushed entire civilizations under its boot, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. Planets were decimated, their resources harvested without a shred of mercy. For decades, the Empire had expanded its reach across the stars, subjugating species and absorbing territories into its sprawling, oppressive domain. To the Trithians, the galaxy was theirs for the taking, and their latest conquest was Earth, a small, insignificant planet in the far reaches of the galaxy. The Empire had scouted Earth thoroughly, finding nothing remarkable about it. Its inhabitants were primitive, with only rudimentary technology and no significant defenses. The Trithians felt no need for caution. Earth was just another pitiful species to crush beneath their superior might. They believed the humans would bend the knee quickly, surrendering without resistance, as had every other species they had encountered. To them, Earth's fate had already been sealed. The invasion force was assembled, and the fleet set its course for the Blue Planet. Among the Trithian commanders, General Zorthel led the invasion with cold, calculated confidence. A veteran of dozens of successful campaigns, Zorthel had no doubt Earth would fall within days. He had seen countless planets burn and crumble before him. Earth's primitive defenses were no match for the Empire's might. As his ships emerged from hyperspace, his expectations were simple: the humans would either surrender immediately or be wiped out with surgical precision. But what Zorthel didn't anticipate was the quiet resistance that came in the form of a human who wasn't part of the military at all, a historian named Captain Daniel Nash. Nash was far from the typical hero. He wasn't a young, fresh-faced soldier eager for combat, nor was he a military strategist with years of battlefield experience. He was an older man, a retired military analyst, who had spent his post-service years studying the intricacies of warfare, not just the tactics of modern war, but the long history of human conflict. Nash had never fired a shot in years, content to teach and lecture on human history. He never believed he would be called upon again to lead. But when the invasion began, Nash found himself called into action by a desperate government. Earth's military might was no match for the Trithian Empire's technological superiority, and panic began to spread among the global leaders. The human forces lacked the advanced weapons the Trithians wielded, and their traditional military strategies were primitive compared to the highly advanced tactics of the invaders. The human army needed more than just soldiers, it needed a mind capable of thinking beyond conventional warfare. Nash was that mind. Nash didn't see Earth's lack of technology as a weakness, but as an advantage. The humans had fought and survived countless wars over the millennia, many of which were fought against overwhelming odds. It was the lessons of history, and the sheer unpredictability of human nature, that Nash believed could turn the tide. If he could apply ancient, time-tested military strategies, tactics that relied not on technology but on human ingenuity, he might be able to exploit the Trithians' overconfidence. The Trithians, in their arrogance, believed their overwhelming firepower would lead them to swift victory. They did not anticipate that the humans, outgunned and outclassed in terms of military technology, would fight back using methods they could not understand. Nash knew this. The key to victory was not in trying to match the Trithians' firepower but in exploiting their weaknesses, their underestimation of human resolve, their over-reliance on brute force, and their inability to think outside the box. He didn't waste time on pleasantries or diplomatic niceties. The situation was dire, and Nash moved quickly to organize a resistance. He called upon the remnants of Earth's military, a fractured, disorganized force of soldiers, civilians, and volunteers. Their morale was low, and their resources were thin, but they had one thing the Trithians did not: the ability to think and adapt quickly. Nash's first move was simple: deception. The Trithians expected the humans to fall into disarray, running and hiding in terror. But Nash ordered the creation of false defenses, decoy weapons systems, and empty fortifications designed to mislead the invaders into thinking the humans had more strength than they did. The Trithian intelligence network was quick to report these fabricated defenses as real, and Zorthel was forced to re-strategize, diverting precious resources into what was ultimately an empty effort. The first few engagements were telling. The Trithians quickly demolished human outposts, but the humans weren't running. They weren't surrendering. They were making the Trithians fight for every inch of land, every city, every piece of territory. Nash's tactics were simple, but they worked. The humans fought not with brute strength, but with cunning. They used terrain to their advantage, setting traps, laying ambushes, and making every battle cost the Trithians more than they had anticipated. As the days passed, the Trithians began to grow frustrated. They had expected quick victories, but instead, they were facing resistance at every turn. Their commanders, trained in the art of war as it had been practiced for millennia, were thrown off balance by the unpredictable nature of human tactics. Nash knew this was his opportunity. For the first time, the Trithians began to question their own superiority. Their ships, superior in firepower, were being outmaneuvered by human forces that were using ancient, low-tech warfare tactics. The Trithians, who had once scoffed at Earth's primitive methods, were now forced to confront the fact that they couldn't simply obliterate their enemies with superior technology. They had been fighting wars of annihilation for centuries, but humanity fought wars of survival, of resourcefulness, of sheer willpower. The humans didn't fight with advanced weapons or ships, they fought with strategy, with psychology, with deception. Nash's expertise, born not from modern military technology, but from human history, had shifted the balance of power. Nash's first small victory was a mere skirmish, but to the humans, it was everything. It was a sign that they could survive, that they could outsmart their foes. And it was the beginning of something the Trithians could never have anticipated, a new kind of war, one where humanity's greatest weapon was not their guns, but their minds. Nash's message was clear: the Trithians would have to learn to fight the human way, or they would lose, and this was just the beginning. The real war was only starting, and the Trithians had no idea what they were up against. The tide of the war had begun to shift, though not in the way the Trithians expected. With every passing day, the Empire's military machine, so advanced and so well equipped, found itself bogged down by something the Trithians couldn't fully understand: the ingenuity of humanity. Captain Daniel Nash's strategies had caught them off guard, forcing the Trithians to fight an enemy they had underestimated. It was not a war of technology or overwhelming firepower, but one of wits, deception, and patience. Nash's first move, deception, had already proven its worth. The Trithians, expecting to find human defenses that could be easily wiped out, had instead found themselves tangled in false fortifications, fake battlegrounds, and empty cities that left them vulnerable to human guerrilla tactics. Nash wasn't interested in meeting the Trithians head-on; he knew that would be a death sentence. Instead, he used their own arrogance against them. Every ambush, every misdirection, every small victory, chipped away at the Trithian confidence. As the Trithian forces pushed deeper into human territory, they became increasingly frustrated by the unexpected resistance. On every front, they found themselves unable to break through with their usual methods. Earth's cities weren't fully bombarded, but instead, they were defended with small, agile forces using hit-and-run tactics. Instead of fighting to the last man, the humans seemed to disappear into thin air, only to pop up elsewhere and hit the Trithians where it hurt most. The more the Trithians fought, the more they began to realize that the war wasn't as simple as they had thought. There was something else at play, something they had never accounted for. It wasn't just military force; they were losing the war because they didn't understand the human psyche. Humans didn't just fight for survival. They fought for something deeper: the fight for their future, their families, and their freedom. It was this primal instinct that Nash knew how to exploit. Nash's second strategy was psychological warfare. Where the Trithians had always relied on their superior weapons to intimidate and conquer, the humans fought with their minds. Nash ordered the use of disinformation, false signals, and psychological tricks to create confusion in the Trithian ranks. The humans planted fake intelligence reports, spread rumors of an impending human counteroffensive, and even broadcasted fabricated messages from supposed defectors within the Trithian army, sowing seeds of doubt among their ranks. What the Trithians failed to realize was that these tricks weren't just about confusing the enemy, they were about breaking their will. When the Trithian commanders received false reports of human uprisings or ambushes in their supply lines, it sparked panic. Their normally disciplined ranks began to fracture as soldiers questioned the intelligence they had been given. Nash knew that without the morale of the Trithian soldiers, the war would unravel from within. In one instance, the Trithians launched a major offensive against a human stronghold. The battle was brutal, and the Trithians, expecting a swift victory, unleashed their full might. Yet, when they stormed the human fortifications, they found nothing but empty streets. The humans had seemingly vanished. It was a trap. As they searched the area, pockets of human forces attacked from hidden positions, firing precise shots and retreating before the Trithians could retaliate. The more the Empire tried to push forward, the more it seemed they were simply playing into Nash's hands. For Nash, the key was always in the human ability to adapt. Humans didn't have the luxury of enormous, flawless war machines, but they had an innate flexibility and resourcefulness that made them unpredictable. The Trithians were not used to enemies that changed tactics with every engagement. They had trained to fight wars of attrition, where technology and numbers were the deciding factors. Nash's plan was to make them fight a different kind of war, one where adaptability and cunning were far more important than superior weaponry. In one particularly clever maneuver, Nash led the Trithians into a victory that would cost them dearly. He lured them into an area where they believed they had cornered the remaining human forces, only to lead them into a labyrinth of tunnels and underground bunkers. There, the humans set up explosives and set traps that would decimate the Trithian forces, creating a psychological blow even more devastating than the physical one. The Trithians had won the battle in the conventional sense, but they had lost something much more valuable, their sense of invincibility. With each passing day, the Trithians began to see their dominance crumble. Their leaders, once confident in their military prowess, grew uncertain. Reports from the front lines were inconsistent, and commanders returned with stories of inexplicable human resilience and ingenuity. Zorthel, the general leading the invasion, grew increasingly frustrated as his troops were ambushed, misled, and drawn into costly conflicts. At every turn, they were met with opposition they hadn't planned for, and their technology, once the source of their strength, seemed to be useless against a human adversary that wouldn't follow the script. The Trithians had one advantage: their technological superiority. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their communication systems nearly flawless. But Nash knew that even the most advanced technology couldn't account for everything. A well-placed trap, a misleading signal, or an unexpected tactical maneuver could turn the tide of any battle. The Trithians couldn't adapt to the chaos that Nash had introduced into their campaigns. It wasn't long before Zorthel began to question the very basis of his strategy. His reports were filled with conflicting information: one day, a victory; the next, a costly retreat. The Trithians' military doctrine, based on overwhelming force and precision, was suddenly irrelevant. They were stuck fighting a war they couldn't comprehend, against an enemy who didn't play by the rules. Nash's impact was felt beyond the battlefield. The human resistance began to rally behind his leadership. People who had been hiding in fear now found hope in the face of the Trithian onslaught. Nash's strategies were not just about military tactics, they were about making the people of Earth believe they could survive, that they could win. And the more the humans fought, the more they realized that their greatest weapon wasn't technology or brute strength. It was their sheer will to survive. As the Trithian forces struggled to gain ground, they began to question their own ability to win. The war was no longer about overwhelming force. It had become something else entirely. It was a contest of minds, of wills, and the Trithians found themselves losing, not to weapons, but to the human spirit. The Trithian Empire was now firmly on the back foot, though they refused to acknowledge it. For every battle the humans lost, they gained something far more important: the confidence to fight on. Captain Daniel Nash had proven that war was more than just battles won or lost, it was about how much one could endure and adapt. The Trithians, so accustomed to their technological superiority, had underestimated the power of human ingenuity. Now, their grand invasion was beginning to falter, and Zorthel, the lead general, was feeling the weight of it. Desperation had set in among the Trithian ranks. At first, the Empire believed their overwhelming firepower and advanced weapons would quash the human resistance in mere days. Yet, months had passed, and their military, despite its advancements, found itself trapped in a war it couldn't win with sheer strength alone. Nash's unconventional tactics, which involved using human creativity and the art of misdirection, had worn down their forces. Even their most advanced technologies, hyperspace sensors, plasma cannons, and cloaking devices, had proven ineffective in the face of the humans' cunning. The turning point came when the Trithians decided to unleash their ultimate weapon, a planet-destroying device capable of obliterating all life on Earth in a single strike. It was a weapon so powerful that no race, not even the greatest of galactic empires, had dared to deploy it before. General Zorthel believed it was the only option left. If Earth couldn't be conquered through conventional means, it could be eradicated entirely. The weapon, called the Ragnarok pulse, was the epitome of Trithian arrogance. It wasn't just a weapon, it was an act of finality, a declaration that they were above even the need for a war. As Zorthel's fleet prepared to fire the Ragnarok pulse, the humans were unaware of the looming threat. Nash had continued to lead his forces in small, calculated strikes against the Trithian infrastructure, keeping their attention diverted. But in his heart, Nash knew that a full-scale attack would only provoke the Empire into unleashing their ultimate weapon. It was a risk, but Nash had been planning for this moment from the very beginning. Months of carefully executed strikes and decoy operations had given Nash a unique advantage. He knew exactly how the Trithians operated. Their technology was advanced, but their minds were predictable. They thrived on domination, power, and a rigid sense of order. Nash's tactics, based on deception, psychological warfare, and the exploitation of the Trithians' overconfidence, had eroded their strategic superiority. They were no longer the impenetrable force they once were. Their forces were scattered, and their command structure was slowly crumbling. But it was time for Nash to make the final move. Nash had studied the Ragnarok pulse's mechanics. The weapon was a marvel of Trithian engineering, powerful enough to obliterate a planet, but it had one significant flaw: it relied on a highly complex array of energy conduits that were vulnerable to sabotage. If one of those conduits were severed or redirected, the weapon would malfunction, rendering it useless. Nash had spent weeks gathering intelligence, working with Earth's engineers and scientists, studying Trithian technology in secret. They had located the energy conduits that powered the Ragnarok pulse, and Nash knew exactly where to strike. With a small, specialized team of human soldiers, Nash infiltrated the heart of the Trithian fleet. Their mission was simple: sabotage the Ragnarok pulse and render it inoperable. It was an impossible task, but Nash's reputation as a strategist was built on the belief that humans could win wars not with brute force, but with creative, unpredictable tactics. The operation was a delicate one. Every detail had to be perfect. If even one of the team members faltered, the consequences would be catastrophic. Nash had spent days preparing for this, understanding the complex layers of the Trithian security systems and designing a plan that would allow his team to infiltrate without being detected. The night before the operation, Nash gathered his team. Each soldier was handpicked for their skills, but more importantly, their ability to think on their feet. These weren't just soldiers, they were thinkers, strategists in their own right. Nash addressed them quietly, without any bravado or ceremony. "We're not just fighting for survival anymore," Nash said, his voice calm but firm. "We're showing them what humanity is made of. They think they've already won. Let's prove them wrong." The team nodded, and within hours, they had infiltrated the Trithian mothership. The operation was as covert as it was dangerous. The Trithians, with their advanced security systems and towering defenses, would never expect a small human team to be capable of breaching their inner sanctum. But Nash had anticipated their every move, and the team slipped past the outer layers of security with ease. The core of the mothership, where the Ragnarok pulse was located, was heavily guarded. But Nash had studied the Trithians long enough to know their weaknesses. Their pride, their overconfidence in their technology, and their belief that no one could ever threaten them. He used that against them. Nash had the team create diversions on multiple levels of the ship, disabling communication systems, triggering false alarms in different sectors, all while they made their way to the heart of the vessel. When they finally reached the Ragnarok pulse, Nash gave the order. His team went to work, using their knowledge of the tiian power systems to sabotage the weapon. They didn't need to destroy it, just to break the critical conduits that fed the energy to the weapon. It was a small act, but it would have massive consequences. Nash didn't wait to see the results. He knew that once the weapon was disabled, the tiians would be forced to confront the one thing they had been trying to avoid all along, the true strength of humanity. It wasn't in their technology, their armies, or their weaponry. It was in their hearts, their resilience, and their capacity for survival, no matter the odds. As the tiian fleet prepared to fire, the Ragnarok pulse failed to charge. The weapon, which had been the Empire's last hope, was now a useless relic, crippled by the very humans they had dismissed as primitive and weak. General Zorthel stared in disbelief at the malfunctioning weapon. For the first time in his career, he was facing defeat, not from superior technology, but from human willpower and strategy. In that moment, Nash's voice echoed across the tiian command channels. "The war is over, General. You've lost." As the human team reached the heart of the tiian mothership, the tension was palpable. The corridors were eerily quiet, with only the hum of advanced technology filling the air. It was an unnerving stillness, one that suggested that the tiians were too sure of themselves, believing their position unassailable. But Nash had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and as they moved through the narrow passageways, every step felt deliberate, every breath measured. They were about to strike a blow that could turn the tide of the entire war. Nash knew that the key to the operation's success lay in timing. The tiians had no idea they were being infiltrated, and every second counted. They couldn't afford to rush. Any wrong move could set off alarms or alert the security forces stationed around the Ragnarok pulse's power conduits. Nash's team, trained in precision and secrecy, moved like shadows, slipping past patrols and using the environment to their advantage. There was no room for error. The fate of humanity, and the future of Earth, depended on the success of this mission. When they reached the central control room of the Ragnarok pulse, the sight before them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The weapon was a massive structure, with glowing energy conduits running like veins throughout its core. The power that flowed through this device was unimaginable, enough to wipe out Earth and its population in the blink of an eye. It was a symbol of the tiian Empire's arrogance, a weapon meant to show that no one, not even an entire planet, could stand against their might. Nash's team stood for a moment, taking in the magnitude of their task. This was the heart of the beast, the source of its power, and they had to tear it apart from the inside. The plan was simple but risky. Nash had identified the weak points in the weapon's design, the energy conduits that powered the Ragnarok pulse. If one of these conduits was sabotaged, it would cause a cascade failure, rendering the weapon useless. Nash had already spent days analyzing the blueprints, understanding the layout of the control room, and working with Earth's top engineers to design a device capable of severing the conduits without triggering a full-scale alert. The team had brought with them a set of explosive charges, small enough to be concealed but powerful enough to do the job. The key was placing them in the right spots, far enough from each other to avoid triggering a chain reaction, but close enough to cause the disruption they needed. As Nash's team got to work, they planted the charges with the precision of surgeons, each move deliberate, every moment filled with tension. They couldn't afford to make a single sound. The room was swarming with tiian drones, and any noise could alert them to the presence of intruders. Nash motioned for his team to hurry, but there was no sense of panic. The silence in the control room was thick, almost suffocating, as the explosive charges were carefully set in place, each one aimed at a critical conduit. The team worked in unison, moving with the precision of a well-rehearsed operation. At the final moment, when the charges were in position and the countdown had begun, Nash looked at each member of his team. There were no words to exchange, everything had been said through their actions. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, countless hours of training, and the sacrifices of those who had fought for their survival. If they succeeded, the Ragnarok pulse would be destroyed, and with it, the Trithian threat would be crippled. If they failed, it would mean the annihilation of everything they had fought for. The moment of truth came as Nash pressed the detonator. The charges exploded in quick succession, sending shockwaves through the core of the Ragnarok pulse. The entire ship seemed to shudder as the energy conduits began to crack and break apart. The lights flickered, and alarms blared, signaling that something had gone terribly wrong. Nash knew they had only seconds before the Trithians realized what had happened. They had to escape, and fast. But their escape wasn't as smooth as they had hoped. The explosion had triggered a lockdown, and the corridors were now swarming with Trithian soldiers. Nash and his team fought their way through the ship's narrow hallways, taking down guards with swift, calculated movements. Every step felt like a race against time. They couldn't afford to be caught now, not when they had come this far. As they made their way to the extraction point, Nash's mind raced. He knew that the destruction of the Ragnarok pulse would force the Trithians into a corner. Without their ultimate weapon, their power would be severely diminished. The humans had finally leveled the playing field. The Trithians' overconfidence in their technology had been their downfall, and now, it was Nash's brilliance and the resilience of humanity that had delivered the final blow. Just as they reached the exit, a Trithian patrol cornered them. For a moment, it seemed like they had run out of options, but Nash's mind never stopped working. He quickly analyzed their position and saw an opportunity, a small ventilation shaft nearby. It was narrow, barely large enough for a human to squeeze through, but it was their only chance. Nash gestured to his team, and without hesitation, they began crawling into the shaft, one by one. The Trithians were closing in, but the shaft led them to the outer rim of the ship, just in time to be extracted by a waiting human shuttle. As they broke free from the mothership, the Earth's forces launched their final assault on the remaining Trithian fleet. The loss of the Ragnarok pulse had shattered the invaders' morale, and with their primary weapon destroyed, the Empire's forces were scattered and demoralized. Nash's mission had not only crippled their technological advantage but had exposed the ultimate truth: no matter how powerful the Trithians were, they couldn't overcome the human spirit. And that, in the end, was what had won the war. The Trithian Empire, once thought to be unstoppable, had been forced to retreat, leaving Earth behind. Nash had shown them that war was not just about technology or firepower, it was about resilience, cunning, and the will to survive. The humans had taught the Trithians the real meaning of war: it wasn't about destruction, but about how much you were willing to endure to protect what you held dear. And in that, the humans had emerged victorious.